The Community Foundation for Palm Beach and Martin Counties is grateful to partner with the Alford Group in presenting this webinar. As a community leader, we continue to share information with our constituent groups that will help them thrive, so together we can continue to build a vibrant community. Good news about this webinar, it qualifies for 1.5 points toward the CFRE credit. During the webinar, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will cover those after the panel discussion. Sharon Tiknis, Chief Client Experience Officer for the Alford Group, will be presenting the Giving USA data. Following Sharon's presentation, we will facilitate a discussion with our prominent panelists. Sharon is a perfect person to present this data because she's held leadership positions in the nonprofit sector for over 35 years, developing distinguished philanthropic programs and assembling influential volunteer leaders to build organizational capacity and drive results. Having worked previously with the Alford Group, Sharon returned to the firm in 2014. Her work as an executive and consultant spans all sectors and has resulted in setting bold strategies and raising hundreds of millions of dollars to meet community needs. She's a frequent speaker on webinars and at conferences. Sharon is the board chair of Grand River Academy, an all-boys school, and serves on the Giving Institute and AFP Chicago education committees. Please join me in welcoming Sharon.
Wouldn't you know I'm on mute? Thank you, Vicki. So grateful to have this opportunity to join you and others from the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin County again. Jamie Philippi and I my colleague at the Alford Group, have had a wonderful series of opportunities to work with the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin Counties, and couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity to share this information with your audience today. So let me tell you a little bit about the Alford Group. We are a woman and minority owned and led firm. We strive to strengthen the nonprofit sector and create a better world for all people. The Alford Group strengthens nonprofits with solutions tailored to the unique circumstances of each client. And with 40 years of experience, we understand the business of mission-based organizations and the challenges we all face. So we deliver a full range of consulting services, partnering with organizations to advise on building capacity in fundraising, in governance, and in organizational strategy. Two of the Alford Group's core values are equity and diversity. And since 1999, we've been the diversity partner with AFP International and the AFP Foundation. Starting last year, we sponsored the launch of the Idea Impact, the Alford Group Mentoring and Leadership Development Program, which has been created to provide support and guidance to women in the fundraising profession to meet their highest potential and the highest level of service within nonprofit organizations. So we encourage you to check that out if you're looking to advance your career in service to the nonprofit sector, the impact sector, as Julie likes to say. Our firm is equally proud to be a member of the Giving Institute and a supporter of Giving USA Foundation, which brings us to this body of research that we're ready to dive into here today. So, published by the Giving USA Foundation, part of the Giving Institute comprised of national firms such as the Alford Group. Our firm and members of the Institute contribute to this report, which has been compiled now for 30 years. It's researched and written by the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where you're going to hear more from Cathy and Vicki, who have a relationship and prominent roles there. And it's published by the Giving USA Foundation. It started in 1956 by Giving Institute, and it's researched and written, as I said, by the incredible Center Philanthropy team at Indiana University. So what we're going to cover in the next about 20 minutes is all that the 2020 data has to share, the rates of change in giving in the last 2 years, trends in total giving, economic trends and impact factors, and what's happening by source of giving and by recipient type. So the big news here is that with the big data project that is looking at 128 million households, 60,000 nonprofits, 80,000 US foundations of businesses of all sizes, giving in 2020 increased to $471.44 billion, an increase of 5.1% over 2019, the highest year of charitable giving on record. Here you can see total giving over all these years, looking back 40 years, and total charitable giving increased by 22.8 billion in current dollars over 2019. You can see here that since 1981, total giving in current dollars grew the most in the 10-year period between 1991 and 2000 at a 123% increase. The slowest 10-year period was between 2001 and 2010, a 24.2% decrease. And of course, we all know the Great Recession of 2007 and 8 had a lot to do with that. So what factors influence giving and what happened in 2020? Well, we don't need to even say it, but we must recognize a global pandemic certainly created an economic crisis and crisis on many other levels. Racial and social justice efforts rocked the US in the summer of 2020. Personal income ended up increasing by 7% over 2019. The gross domestic product, which is something I get excited about, but I think it's a very telling factor, declined by 2.3%, not surprising given the reduction in manufacturing and supply chain issues, which even today we're still grappling with. And by the end of 2020, the S&P stock market grew by 16.3%. So this is something that's really unusual for GDP to go down and the S&P to go up. But nonetheless, it's an important telling story of how giving has been impacted by the market and by GDP over these years. Just another way to look at it on this graph here. So as we look at total giving, which is in the black dotted line here, and we look at the S&P 500 in the lime green line, you can see here the correlation of dips and peaks and valleys of giving. And research has found that a statistically significant correlation between changes in giving and values in the Standard & Poor's 500 absolutely impacts the indicated feeling of financial and economic security, and households and corporations are more likely to give when the stock market is up, regardless of whether or not an individual has significant investment through the stock market. Knowing that the stock market is healthy is something that compels us to say, I think I'm going to be okay. So we might give more than we would otherwise. So taking a look here at GDP, the reason why this is important is that several economic factors relate to how much donors give each year, and GDP is one of those. It's defined as the market value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders within a specific period of time. It's the most important factor considered in measuring the status of a nation's economic wealth and health. So we can see here that GDP as a percentage of giving was an increase of 2.3%, but GDP itself declined by 2.3%. Ironic that the numbers are exactly the same. And if you were with us last year, I'm going to say something I said then. When you think about GDP, if giving increased as a portion of GDP by even 1%, just imagine how many billions of dollars more that would be to invest in the impact sector and to increase quality of life for all. So where did all this money go? $471.44 billion. Individuals gave 69% of giving. They gave 9% of bequest giving, of the 9% of the $471 billion. Corporations gave 4% and foundations 19%. So this is the mix of where the money came from. And just a reminder that foundations are, about half of them are made up of individual family giving. So just a reminder that when we think about giving by individuals, it's 69% plus 9% plus half of 19. So nearly 90% of all giving comes from individuals in one way or another. And that's an important thing for all of us to remember and to help educate our board members and volunteers and even colleagues in our organizations to understand when they say, oh, just go get a big foundation grant, or oh, just go get a big gift from a corporation. Those are important and they add to the mix, but where giving comes from is from individuals. And individuals make money in a lot of different ways, some of them from major, some of them as owners of their businesses, but nonetheless, relationships with individuals continues to be a theme regardless of what factors change and how organizations come together. So again, just another look at what those changes look like on a year-to-year basis. Giving was up by 2.2% through individuals. Bequests were up 10.3%. There's not a lot of data, but needless to say, sadly, in 2020, there were an increased number of people who died in our country, and those who had bequests obviously accelerated giving in 2020. Foundations gave 17% more, and thank goodness. In addition to the stock market being up, foundations took a serious look at how they're investing their portfolios, how they're managing the reserves they have, and they also made a concerted effort to give more unrestricted gifts. And what a blessing that was to so many organizations to have foundations truly increase their giving in such a dramatic way at a time when we needed it most. And then giving by corporations, as I shared momentarily a moment ago, a decrease in their pre-tax profits resulted in a reduction in their giving in 2020. So giving by individuals. So $324 billion was given in 2020, an increase of 2.2%, as I mentioned. The total estimated giving by individuals in 2020 includes those who itemize and non-itemized charitable contributions. It includes gifts of cash, securities, and property, those three being where the Giving USA Foundation and Lilly School of Philanthropy continues to find the data reliant for this report. But giving by individuals, the number of individuals has declined considerably as a percentage of total giving over the last 40 years, from 82% in the first 5-year period beginning in 1981 to 70% in the last 5-year period beginning in 2016. On the flip side, there's been an increase in the very large mega gifts and gifts by individuals that require an adjustment to the econometric estimate, plus adjustments to individual giving estimates, were definitely influenced by the global pandemic and racial justice. So where did we read all about these big gifts? Well, here's a few of them. Mega gifts of more than $10 million totaled $17 billion in giving in 2020. So of that $324 billion that was given by individuals, 17 billion of that came from individuals giving 10 million or more. And some of the notable ones, Jeff Bezos, even before the pandemic, gave 10 billion to fight climate change in February last year. And of course, 2020 will certainly be remembered for the year Mackenzie Scott, a novelist and former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, started giving big. It started last summer when she revealed donations of almost 1.7 billion to over 100 nonprofits. That included 6 historically Black colleges and universities. Then in December, she announced 4.2 billion had been given to hundreds of organizations. So in 2020, she gave 5.7 billion, working closely with consultants and community leaders to identify a total of 512 organizations who received 7- and 8-figure gifts. And just this month, Mackenzie and her husband, Dan Jewett, announced they gave another $2.74 billion to 267 nonprofit organizations. So these publicly announced gifts in the last 12 months total $8.64 billion. Nike co-founder Phil Knight and his wife Penelope donated $1.4 billion, including $465 million to the University of Oregon and other grants in Oregon to provide relief from the pandemic and to treat and contain COVID-19. Jack Dorsey, co-founder of Twitter, put $1.1 billion into donor-advised funds like the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin County. Not that he did there, but that would be great. I know Danita and Vicki, you would be really happy about that. And then he distributed about a third of it, giving $330 million to more than 100 charities to help people recover from the pandemic and to groups focused on racial equity. Michael Bloomberg gave $100 million to medical schools at 4 historically Black colleges and universities to attempt to improve health and wealth in Black communities. That gift will benefit 800 medical students with grants of up to $100,000 each to support their studies. Charles Schwab and his wife Helen gave $65 million to address homelessness in San Francisco. Netflix co-founder Reed Hastings and his wife Patty gave $120 million for financial aid for Black students at historically Black colleges and universities, $40 million each to the United Negro College Fund, Spelman College, and Morehouse College. And Michael Jordan gave $50 million, pledged $50 million to racial and social justice groups. So taking a quick look at foundations, grant making by independent community foundations like the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin Counties, and operating foundations increased by 17%, with $88.55 billion in 2020. The estimated giving by foundations in 2020 includes an adjustment of $2.37 billion for giving to COVID relief and racial justice giving, and 3/4 of the foundations surveyed by the Center for Effective Philanthropy increased their share of grant dollars to provide urgent, unrestricted support in 2020. So 3/4 of foundations made those urgent and unrestricted grants. So giving by foundations has substantially grown in the past 40 years, and you can see also the impact of the stock market in having more earnings from reserves to apply to their giving to organizations. Charitable giving by bequest increased 10.3%, totaling $41.91 billion. Giving by bequest is captured an increase in giving over the last 40 years, ranging between 7% and 9%. And when we look at how bequests are counted, behind the scenes, if you look at the detail, there's a breakdown of giving by level. So estimated amount of charitable gifts with estates with assets of 5 million or more, $1 million or more, and $5 million or $1 million or less. So about 22 billion of the 41 that was given was from estates of 5 million or more. So about a little more than half. And then giving from estates between 1 and 5 million totaled 8.6 billion. And then as gifts between estate distributions below $1 million accounted for 11.24 billion of this 41 billion dollars that was contributed. So giving by corporations, again, a decrease of 6.1% over 2019. And when we look at the reality of a 3.5% drop in pre-tax profits, and knowing even that giving by corporations, which includes in-kind gifts, decreased in 2020, in part because there was a reduction in goods to be able to contribute. So taking a look at where the money went, right? So these are all the sectors within the nonprofit realm. Again, the impact sector, where big things happen that make life better for all of our communities. And you can see that religious organizations continue to receive the largest share of charitable dollars at 28% of total giving. That's been on the decline for many years. It was as much as 50% not so many years ago. So the decrease in giving to religious organizations, which are religious organizations, are houses of worship and communities that are focused on religious practice and gathering. A Catholic hospital would be in health. A Protestant university would be in education. A Catholic charities would be in human services. So just to clarify, part of what's happening with giving to religion is that faith-based organizations within each sector are the recipients of gifts from prior, a different distribution that we see occurring. So education comprised the second largest portion of charitable giving at 15%. Human service organizations ranked third, and this is a definite bump in giving to human services, obviously pandemic related. Gifts to grant-making foundations, including independent community and operating foundations, was the fourth largest. A lot of people utilizing the community foundation to manage their giving through the pandemic. It was an exciting story to see across the country how essential community foundations became to the distribution of urgent funds and to those organizations who could have the greatest impact in their work. And certainly Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin Counties was stellar in its ability to receive contributions, to distribute, and to work with the community to identify how to have the greatest impact. The fifth largest portion was public society benefit organizations. These include United Way and Jewish Federation and other organizations like that, followed by health sector. And health declining in 2020 may seem out of sync, but part of what drives giving toward health in the higher percentages in prior years is gifts toward capital projects at hospitals or in other ways that help to build the infrastructure of health. And this year, the giving was more focused on research and vaccine production and care of COVID patients. So all of that went more into internal than into capital projects that tend to make the health giving a higher portion of total giving. International affairs had a slight bump. I think, whenever international affairs has an increase in giving, it's typically related to a natural disaster in another country. And given the global reality of the pandemic, we are well aware of the suffering and the needs in other communities and other countries, and clearly philanthropists responded to that international need. Arts and culture had a really difficult year with a decrease of 7.5% over the previous year. And I know how excited we all are to get back into the theater and the museum and to cultural lectures and to be together and inspired by the great work of our artistic and cultural giants and community surge. Looking at environment and animals, it received 3% of total gifts, and finally gifts made to individuals amounted to 3%, but we also know gifts to individuals aren't fully reported and aren't able to be tracked, and that's one place where we know giving beyond the numbers that account for this $4.71 billion of giving. We know that there's a lot more that's happening out there that isn't able to be tracked in this report, and giving to individuals certainly increased, as we all know, in our own lives in the last year. So again, 7 of the 9 subsectors grew. The only 2 that didn't were health and arts and culture. And we look at 2 years, which I think is helpful, particularly because the pandemic was such a, in 2020 overall was such a distinctive year. It's helpful to look at what the 2-year trend looks like. So you can see here, 2019 giving in the lime green and 2018-19 in the black bar. And you can see here how there's been a flow of giving, and what a huge difference for the arts, going from 11.3% of all giving in 2018-19 to a reduction of 7.5% in 2020. So all of this information is in the Giving USA report, and there's wonderful packages. I really encourage you to take a look at what's in this report, and to share it with your board, utilize this information. And just to give you a few final thoughts on what this tells us about 2021. Listen to your donors. They're eager to hear how your organization is making an impact. Partner with other organizations. It inspires others to give. Be prepared to answer, how would a gift of 1 million or more impact solutions and make a difference in the impact your organization can make? The Alford Group has many clients who were recipients of gifts from Mackenzie Scott, and many of them thought that initial email, which doesn't say, this is Mackenzie Scott calling, and what would you like to do with some potential money? I mean, it was a long process, and those who were prepared to share how a transformational gift could make a difference were often successful in receiving those gifts. But that's happened time and time again. I mean, Mackenzie Scott is the one that we all know about. That's happening more and more, where people are saying, I really believe in your organization, the impact you're making. So be prepared to answer that question. Be bold and be confident when you share your commitment to more sustainable and equitable practices, and invest in equity-centered philanthropy. We are called to help our communities, to open the table to all. And the Alford Group really celebrates those of you who are embracing this moment to ensure that all that you are approaching in your work is benefiting your communities to the greatest extent possible. And we have created a tool called the Culture of Equity Assessment at the Alford Group that I'd be happy to share information with you about if this is something that could be helpful to you and your organization. So Vicki, with that, we're here to have our panelists take this into the real world of how we can all have a greater impact, and how philanthropy can be the driving force that really opens the door to new opportunities. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this.
Thank you, Sharon. That was a great overview of a lot of data. You know, we see this report come out every year, and it always makes us think, well, how's that going to impact us, our philanthropy, our giving, our fundraising? And that's why we put this panel together, and we put it together intentionally so that we can talk about a local perspective for this data, a statewide perspective, and certainly a national perspective. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Thank you for turning on your screens. And in order to conserve time, I'm just going to give you a mini bio of each of them. All of them are very accomplished nonprofit executives and leaders. And if I read the bios in the entirety, we would be here a long time. So let me start with those panelists who will give us that local perspective. And we'll start with our very own President and CEO, Danita Nias. She's the President and CEO of our Community Foundation for Palm Beach and Martin counties. Prior to joining the foundation, Danita served as the Vice President for Institutional Advancement and Chief Executive Officer of the FAU Foundation at Florida Atlantic University. During her tenure there, she helped catapult the university into a new era of excellence with record-breaking fundraising and spearheaded its second ever comprehensive campaign. She has also held development positions at the University of Florida and the University of Maryland. Patrick McNamara is a neighbor of the Community Foundation and president and CEO there. Patrick joined Palm Health Foundation in 2017 as its president and CEO. He has spent the past 25 years in the nonprofit health and human services sector, including 18 years with community partners, where he also served as president and CEO. He's an experienced nonprofit administrator, social worker, and developer of resources in multiple arenas. Mr. McNamara is licensed in clinical social work with 17 years of management experience and currently leads the senior leadership team at the foundation. To talk about giving from a statewide perspective, we have Sabeen Perwaiz. She is executive director of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance. Here, she strengthens, promotes, and advocates on behalf of Florida's nonprofit sector. During her tenure, FNA, her organization, released Florida's first nonprofit economic impact report and nonprofit compensation survey. So I hope she'll talk about that because there's some really fascinating results in that. Prior to joining the organization, she was a researcher for Vital Voices Global Partnership, served as Special Projects Manager for Pace Center for Girls, implemented an early childhood education program with Aid at Action in Phnom in Cambodia, and led the Earn Up initiative for the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce. Since 2012, Perwaiz has led all volunteer team for TEDx Jacksonville. Perwaiz serves on the steering committee for Women's Giving Alliance and is a member of the Jacksonville Women's Network. And then our final panelist, last but definitely not least, is my friend and colleague, Cathy Brown. She will talk a little bit from a more national perspective on giving, as she is the Associate Director of the Fundraising School at the Indiana University Lilly Family School Philanthropy, where this great data is collected for us. Cathy is a resident of Pensacola, Florida, and holds the title of Associate Director of Education at the Fundraising School, Lilly Family School Philanthropy, at Indiana University. She currently serves as lead practitioner faculty for many of the face-to-face professional development courses, as well as online courses. Cathy joined the fundraising school first in a curriculum design capacity, updating course materials, implementing adult learning strategies into course design, and creating new faculty guides and instructional tools. Cathy has 15 years of experience running small nonprofits and quasi-government agencies, as well as board and volunteer experience in a wide range of subsectors. She also has career experience in K through 12 and college level curriculum design, college access, grant proposal writing, and grant management. She's done a lot. So we're excited to hear from you all. I'm just going to break into the questions. I know these questions will breed other questions as we have our discussion. And I also invite our audience to please share your questions in the chat, and we'll hopefully cover some of those at the end of the panel. So Cathy, the first question is to you. You interact with fundraising professionals all over the country through your work with the Fundraising School. Giving is up this year. Some of that increase, as we learned from Sharon, can be attributed to COVID-19 response funding. According to the Women's Philanthropy Institute, 56% of all US households engaged in funding COVID-related causes and programs. So Cathy, what are nonprofit organizations sharing with you about the anticipated levels of giving this year? And do you think individuals will continue to give at these elevated levels?
Well, thanks for the question, Vicki. I appreciate it. And it's an honor to be with all of you today. To answer your question, I'm hearing and reading a lot of excitement and optimism, as well as a few concerns. So I'll talk just briefly about both. What I'm hearing people particularly excited about is just this whole idea of the country opening back up. and what that's going to be like. The fact that we are going to be able to get out a little bit more, to visit with donors, to have events, those kinds of things. There seems to be a lot of excitement and optimism from fundraisers and those in nonprofits about that opportunity. And the AFP Fundraising Confidence Survey was recently released that sort of backs that, looking at fundraisers' optimism, and it has continued to increase since September of last year around both reaching their goals as well as confidence in raising more money than has been done in 2020. There is a continued and growing confidence in how receptive donors are going to be to their giving, as well as, and this is great news for many of us, a confidence in the ability to hire and replace staff. Which, as we know, in the subsector, in the sector, a lot overall, we lost over 800,000 jobs. So, in this fundraising confidence survey, 30% of the organizations included reported they have planned to hire over the next 3 months, and the independent sector is predicting it may take up to 18 months to return to our pre-COVID employment levels. So people are feeling a little bit better about that. And also that donor retention is a top priority. Certainly thinking about donor retention, major gifts, and there's some optimism around all of those categories. The other thing I'm hearing is some concern about, first of all, realistic expectations. And if we think back to the Ice Bucket Challenge many years ago, I guess several years ago now, and many of our organizations who watched that unfold looked at that as, oh, we should do that again. So there's real concern in the sector about having realistic expectations of what is going to be reality this year. And we're dealing with things like donor fatigue and exhaustion, and fundraiser fatigue and exhaustion. And again, the confidence survey that AFP completed also found similar results, that there was general concern about what reopening of society looks like. That not everybody's going to be ready to jump into a room full of 400 people. That's going to take some time to adjust to, and what those expectations are about virtual events specifically. The idea that there is still some donor fatigue, that people have been caring so deeply about so much for so long now. What will that look like? So again, the study also approached just general exhaustion and burnout. So the last two things I'll share, the Lilly School through our Philanthropy Outlook study predicts that giving by individuals and households will increase another 6% in 2021 and even 3.9% in 2022 on top of the strong growth that we saw in 2020. And we also know that changing legislation is going to play a role. Through the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, John Biederman noted that on December 31st, there was a 28% increase in $300 gifts, which is the exact maximum amount a donor can take for that universal charitable deduction. So some interesting things to kind of think about, but overall, I'd say optimism, excitement, and just some curious concerns.
Thank you, Cathy. Just as good fundraisers, we're all usually very optimistic, but we have to be careful not to burn ourselves out, right? Maybe you could share those links with us, Cathy, either through the chat or we can send them out to people afterwards. There are a couple of studies that you had cited, so we'd love to share those.
I'm happy to do that. Thank
you. Great perspective. Pat, we're going to move on to you. As a major funder in the Palm Beach County, how did you respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how is it shaping your funding in the future?
Thank you, Vicki, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you guys today. So a little bit of background about one of the initiatives that our foundation had started, because it's important context for the direction that we took in responding to the pandemic. We have been involved for the past 7 years in a place-based grant-making effort called Healthier Together. And so the foundation many years ago made the decision, and it was kind of a sea change within the foundation from the way that we had been granting dollars and giving, to make a much more intentional effort to engage particular communities, especially those that were facing the greatest adversities. And so we donated $1 million to each of 6 communities in Palm Beach County. And so through those efforts, we have worked over the years, lots of fits and starts and mistakes and lessons learned, but really strong relationships with local residents and co-designing solutions, as opposed to in the past, one of the things that I was kind of used to doing was designing programs. And you may have heard the expression of nothing about me without me. I continued to hear that phrase in the years before coming over the foundation, and it really has struck me as where so many of our programmatic interventions fall short in terms of coming up with great ideas, but really not incorporating the voice of those with lived experience. And so that is something that we decided at the beginning of the pandemic. We've got these networks. We've been doing some sense making already with them. And sense making is a way of collecting stories and honoring the voice of what's going on with folks. So we worked with folks to collect more stories at the very beginning of the pandemic, knowing that the impacts are going to evolve as the pandemic went on, and there was just so much uncertainty. So we wanted to hear from people as much as possible. In that process, almost within the first week in collecting stories, we found stories that we had an ethical obligation to respond to and some sort of intervention. And so we created the Neighbors Helping Neighbors Fund. We carved out $200,000 from our fund and offered a 1-to-1 match for any donations. And the idea was to respond to incidences of urgent need in the community as we learned about them. And so we worked with not just in each of those communities where Healthier Together has a presence, we worked actually with different community-based groups that already have the trust of local community members. Like in Riviera Beach, it was with a church. And so we would grant out dollars to that church and they would decide who needed the money, basically, according to the things that they were hearing. And so we've continued that process, and the individual stories of the various ways that folks were impacted and helped has really helped us to refine and shape how we're going to move forward using this sort of process. So that's where it's had the biggest impact. And just one anecdote that was an example, we really wanted to stoke as much as possible mutual aid and folks taking care of each other in each of the communities to the extent possible. And a lawyer in Delray heard about our effort early on, and he called us and said he had a Lexus that was a couple of years old, but he had just gotten a new car and wanted to know if he could donate. And we said, well, we've never taken a car donation before, but we'll figure it out. And so we did. We never took title to it, but we helped to transfer it to a family in need, and that was transformative, for that particular family. So it's those sorts of efforts that we really wanted to stoke, and that will inform how we move forward with Healthier Together.
I love that concept of sense making, and I could certainly see how that could shape messaging and craft messaging for future fundraising efforts. So thank you, Pat, for that really great tip. All right, Danita, we're going to move on to you. COVID-19 and the lack of access and knowledge about testing, healthcare, and vaccines for minority populations put a spotlight on inequities in our community. How can nonprofits use what they have learned to shape their future work to be more equitable?
Great question. Thank you for that, Vicki. Let me just also add my thanks to Sharon and Cathy with the Alford Group and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy for just assembling this data, interpreting the data, and allowing us to create actionable insights from it. So thank you all for that. I believe for us as nonprofits, the aha that COVID-19 has presented is that community engagement alone is really insufficient. And we're really moving towards making community engagement more equitable, the actual engagement part of it more equitable. And we know that for engagement to be equitable, it must aim to attract and include participation from group representatives of that community's geography, their race, ethnicity, age, gender, and other demographic characteristics. So building a little bit on what Patrick's work is doing, I'm hoping, and we're starting this at the Community Foundation, is to look at our process and our programs around engagement and making those engagement opportunities equitable. And in order to do that, it starts with recognizing the reality that systemic barriers cause certain populations with regard to having less access to testing, healthcare, and vaccines, as an example, for minority populations. But if those individuals that are close to those nonprofits that are helping those populations aren't a part of our engagement process, it's really difficult for us to provide real-time and relevant solutions. So we will be shifting towards making a central part of our practice, realizing that equitable community engagement involves investment in certain processes that are aimed at underrepresented community members, and including them directly in the design, in the planning, the resource prioritization, and the implementation of these programs. So as Patrick, suggested, rather than the Community Foundation coming and saying, here's what we think you should do, let's bring them into the committee work, let's bring them into the board work, and involve them in the discussion around how we might have a more equitable engagement practice emanating from this foundation.
Great, thank you, Danita, for those comments. I love this focus on place-based philanthropy and how that feeds into equity and kind of almost everything we do. I mean, it's a great model for us as we move forward in our fundraising and giving. Sabeen, we're going to turn to you. The Florida Nonprofit Alliance has been studying giving trends throughout the state of Florida, and you've come up with this wonderful nonprofit impact report that we've heard so much about and really got some good information from. So tell us a little bit of what kind of trends we're seeing here in the state of Florida, and how might they affect what we are doing in the philanthropic community over this next year.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here with you all. It was fascinating hearing Sharon's report, because I think the Decade of Charitable Giving report that we just released a couple of months ago shares the similarities across what's happening nationally. So depending on who you ask and where they live, Florida is doing great. I think the key pieces to keep in mind are that it's not equal across all 67 counties. 10 counties really are carrying the weight of where the bulk of giving is taking place, particularly the top two, you guys, Palm Beach County and then Collier County. So a whopping 54% of our giving came from Palm Beach alone. And so that shows that giving is happening robustly across the state, but it's not happening equally. We've lost a lot of our middle income donors along the decade. And so looking to hopefully bring them back across, the next few years, because we need all of those donors, especially in the smaller counties where we might not have a large donor that's looking to make those Mackenzie Scott size gifts. So it will be interesting to keep that in mind. I think a lot of community foundations like yours that have smaller counties as part of their portfolio as well, that's where you all come in with the great work that you do, because you're able to uplift those smaller nonprofits in those smaller counties that are not with a large donor, and to be able to shine the light on their work and to bring the equitable resources that Danita just mentioned to those communities. The other piece that I would be interested in is also those large donors, how they're translating the gifts that they're giving to their families, and what happens after they leave. You know, will those families continue to give to those communities, or will that gift then move to wherever their children are, their family decides to move their estate, since a lot of us rely heavily on those large gifts that we currently have from a small pool of donors.
We are all studying that trend of next gen donors, where they're going, if they're going to continue to give in our community or where else. I don't know if you would be able to do this now, Sabeen, but or later, or we can send this out after the webinar, but that charitable giving survey, it might be nice to throw a link up so that people
I'll
can
do that right now.
that data. Thank you. All right, Danita, we're going to go back to you and talk a little bit about something that we do regularly at the Community Foundation, and that's work with donors to set up donor advised funds. It's such a huge giving vehicle, fastest growing philanthropic vehicle right now is donor advised funds. So as the new leader of the Community Foundation, how do you see this increased national giving trend impacting this local foundation, and maybe throw in a little bit about donor advised funds and how they become so popular in our philanthropic community?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. So as we all know, 2020 was a great year for charitable giving. And considering just what we all went through, the uncertainty, the fact that giving increased is pretty remarkable. And Cathy mentioned a point that I wanted to reinforce was the number of small gifts that increase. Really bodes well for building and broadening the donor base. You know, the Donor Advised Fund is a vehicle that also took the spotlight during this story of philanthropic giving last year. You know, not only are they widely popular among new donors and old donors, but they are reportedly the fastest growing vehicle for charitable giving. And in 2020 last year, Donor Advised Fund account holders gave out more money more frequently than ever before. And so that's a data point that I think we need to pay attention to. And then, you know, the question becomes why during a period when there was so much uncertainty, how is it that this vehicle continued to inspire so much philanthropic support? And, you know, there's several reasons that I've read that support this trend. And first and foremost is that the simplicity of a DAF within the context of the tax rules is its greatest feature. You know, funding a donor advised fund account reduces the tax liability for the fund holder by allowing them to take an immediate tax deduction for that contribution. So that's clear number one reason. Other reasons that financial advisors have shared is that they're high on including donor advised funds in their clients' portfolios because it also helps to reduce estate taxes. Funding a donor advised fund while approaching retirement, one is able to get that tax deduction while still earning a high income. Also, and we're seeing this a bit at the Community Foundation, creating donor advised funds for children to help them learn to give separately and how to be strategic with their giving. Donor advised funds have actually served as that way in a strategy. And so it's a vehicle that is timely, it's relevant, and it provides the fund holder with a great deal of flexibility while allowing them to take advantage of the current IRS tax codes.
Very good. We'll keep our eyes on those donor advised funds. Everybody can benefit from gifts through those. Pat, let's go back to you. What major shifts should nonprofits anticipate coming out of the pandemic? And kind of to follow up that, talk about the most pressing needs that you're seeing. You've got people right in the community, place-based, finding out what we need. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. And first, let me just say, I wanted to really give a great nod to the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin counties for the response to the pandemic and the collaborative nature of bringing together the funders. That was another way that we responded, and collaboration with the coordination provided by the Community Foundation for us to come together and really do some amazing big things together. So that's one trend that I see moving forward, continuing. Collaboration among the funders is one of the things, and the others are when it comes to public health, the idea of population health and the social determinants of health, that and the recognition of trying to, in the struggle to find leverage with the social determinants of health, took on a whole nother meaning and I think urgency during the pandemic, and that is going to only continue as I see. I think in the giving trends that you saw, if you look at those bars in health and the giving that was made in the health arena actually going down, whereas in the public society benefit arena going up. You're seeing less of an emphasis on healthcare giving and more of an emphasis on population health giving. That had to do with our even changing our name from, we used to be Palm Healthcare Foundation to Palm Health Foundation. And so that growing recognition of nobody has found great answers for finding leverage with the social determinants of health, but it's imperative from an equitable standpoint that we do. Particularly when it comes to housing, when it comes to food, when it comes to education. Those are the basic, most critical needs that we're seeing and have been seeing for a long time in the communities where we work. And those are foundational elements of the social determinants of health. So in order to find leverage with those things, providers and funders need to be able to work together with the residents to co-design solutions. And that's going to be, I think, a lasting thing that nonprofits should be on the lookout for, and an openness to crafting new solutions without walking in and saying, we found the answer.
I love that perspective on the social determinants of health. It really kind of defines what we're considering health in a traditional sense, or a non-traditional sense, I guess. So Cathy, let's move back to you. What do you see as growth opportunities for nonprofit organizations, and where should they be looking for support that may have not been available in the past?
That's a really good question, Vicki. I appreciate it. And as I thought about it, I kind of identified 3 areas, though I'm not sure that I would say maybe they hadn't been looking there or available in the past, but that I would certainly encourage some additional attention. And first is to look internally. Certainly through stewardship and retention. The Fundraising Effectiveness Project that I mentioned earlier that AFP also oversees saw that at the end of 2020, the actual number of donors had increased 7.3% over 2019 for the participants in their particular study. And to Danita's point earlier, the gifts of less than $250 grew by over 15% from the year previous. $250 to $999 was an increase of 8%, and even gifts over $1,000 increased just over 10%. So one area to look, particularly for those organizations that did get all those new donors. I know I'm thinking of my local food pantry and some of those organizations that really saw a big influx. The big area to look at is the stewardship and retention of those donors. I know 2020 saw the lowest donor retention rate that we've ever had on record. However, in the numbers that were just released just a couple of weeks ago through the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, the dollars were up 10% in the first quarter of 2021, or donors, I'm sorry, were up 10%. Dollars were up 6% just in the first quarter of this year. So that retention is going to continue to be critically important. The second area that I think we really are going to have to continue to pay attention to is this whole digital space, right? And we could spend days and days on this conversation, but here's just a couple of little things to take a look at. The Blackbaud Charitable Giving Report saw that 2020 had a 13% increase in giving that came online, or the giving was at 13% of all giving, which was a significant growth in online giving for previous years. And some of those areas in particular that growth has come from were crowdfunding. The Lilly School did a charitable crowdfunding research study that found that those who are giving most often to crowdfunding campaigns are younger. They tend to be less religious. They tend to be single. And the average gift was around 189. And that's considered an additional gift, not an instead of gift. So, you know, the takeaways there that we need to be sure that even if we as an organization are not quite ready to jump into a crowdfunding campaign, that we are learning from the use of that, the growth in that particular area by making our websites really easy to navigate, right? To make that giving process 2 or 3 clicks, because that's what we're getting on things on crowdfunding campaign sites. We want to make sure that our stories are really compelling, that we've got the data, but we've also got the stories to engage, again, the head, the heart, and the hands, or the action we want the donors to take. But the other interesting thing that study showed us is that, in fact, most crowdfunding campaigns don't meet their goals. But those that do have a very specific need and a very compelling story. Andrea Pachter at our school tells the story of the Smithsonian, known for their many campaigns that they put on, you know, big, large, comprehensive campaigns. But they had a very specific need to restore the ruby slippers in their Wizard of Oz display. And so they did that through a crowdfund campaign, and in a week raised over $350,000 because it was a very specific story, very specific need, short period of time. It was so popular, they did a second one and were able to restore the Scarecrow campaign as well, or Scarecrow costume as well. So in any case, this whole crowdfunding is something we're going to need to pay attention to, and social media in general. There's another study about the success of Facebook fundraisers. And while many of us, when we think of a Facebook fundraiser, we think of a Facebook birthday campaign. And while those are popular, the non-campaigns, or what Facebook calls their Facebook challenges, saw a 120% increase in 2020 over to 2019, while the birthdays saw about a 21% increase. So just being aware of some of these different types of campaigns that are out there for younger audiences, for different audiences, while we're continuing to work on those the retention of the existing donors. And the last point, just very quickly, I'll mention, it's been mentioned already, is this whole idea of planned giving. The organizations that didn't stop asking for planned gifts saw an increase last year. It is still top of mind for donors, even if it feels a little bit less comfortable to discuss in the current environment. Organizations who saw donors reach out to actually ask for their help. Free Will reported, it's an online tool, if you're not familiar, that helps people set up their wills. They reported a 600% increase in the number of people who signed up to create an online will during the pandemic. So those are some areas to really continue to work on. Again, I don't know that these are brand new for us, but areas of focus that I think are going to be important in the next year.
Cathy, the results of those Facebook fundraisers, those social media fundraisers, those are not included in any of the data that we heard on the Giving USA survey, are they?
That's a complex question. The easy answer is not in the traditional way that we're sorting that, because of the way that they're being run. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Sabeen. Tell us, Sabeen, what kinds of economic trends in Florida are we seeing and anticipating, and how might these trends give us some clues about donor behavior this year?
Yeah, I think one thing we as a sector need to remember at all times is that Florida gets 1,000 new residents per day moving into our state. So we have a very migratory culture that is here. And how we engage with those 1,000 people is up to us, or not, or engage with them. And, you know, that's a prime pool of individuals that are usually middle to high income donors. We see it in the housing market, and they need to be connected with. So that's something we need to keep in mind. You know, as Cathy mentioned, alternative giving as well. I don't know if you all saw the governor's press conference yesterday with the Florida Chamber. The other piece that was interesting to me was the governor endorsing a foundation and sharing that as a way in which businesses can engage and give to Surfside. He put up the Surfside Foundation as his selected entity that he feels people should be giving to. And that just reminded, again, our mission is advocacy for the sector, that we as a sector need to engage with private and government sector to ensure that they're making decisions, keeping the sector in mind, and implementing the best practices we know as practitioners of the sector. And sometimes we don't do that as a sector. We don't engage with all of the stools of the stool, all the legs of the stool, because we feel like we're just going to stay within our lane. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then finally, from Sharon's presentation earlier, unrestricted giving that increased by 17%. One of the things that we've been hearing from nonprofits is how to budget for 2022. In the last year, and both in 2021 and 2020, we had the PPP, and we had a significant increase from our foundational partners in unrestricted giving for nonprofits. And now, once those two pieces may be gone, the PPP definitely, how does a nonprofit, scale back, because they had a lot of revenue growth. And so keeping that in mind, and then also engaging with philanthropy, both the Mackenzie Scott gifts and these unrestricted increased gifts show that there was a huge amount of trust placed in nonprofits to do their jobs and do their jobs well. And it took away a lot of the reporting and measurements that are usually tied to these size of gifts. And so will that trend stay to keep the sector thriving and growing? We don't know yet. I think those are some of the things that we certainly will be tracking as well.
So Sabeen, as you're seeing some of these new folks infiltrate into Florida, whether they're with a big corporation or maybe they're just retiring here, are they getting engaged in the local philanthropic communities that they're relocating to?
It's an interesting question, because a lot of us in the sector have our own hypotheses. And we're actually partnering with the Lilly School to do a survey of these individuals, high net worth donors, fixed income donors that move into the state, to determine, do they in fact connect with their communities? Because our statewide, our national rankings would allow us to determine that we're not. We're ranked 21st nationally in average adjusted gross income, and 39th in terms of percentage of tax filers who make charitable gifts. And so if we're just looking at population size and the amount of gift giving, we would say they're probably not. And so I think figuring out ways in which, again, we partner with partners like the Chamber of Commerce that connects with a lot of new organizations, new businesses moving into our communities, and making sure we connect those employees to their local community. We have a charitable directory on our website that anyone can access to determine, hey, I'm moving into Palm Beach. What are the nonprofits there? How do we connect with them? They can filter by arts, education, et cetera. But we all need to look at how we can reach these new populations so that we can connect them into their community, both as gift givers, but also giving of their time as board members as well.
Yeah, love that. We're all trying. We're all trying to figure out who's coming and how do we get to know them. So thank you for that insight. Before we move on to our lightning round here, if anyone has a question you want to ask a panelist, please go ahead and throw it in the chat. I'll be looking at those in a second. So again, let's just do a lightning round, and the topic, just very briefly for everyone, in just a few words, tell us what is the one thing nonprofits should keep top of mind as they navigate the coming year. Pat, would you like to start with that question? One thing.
I would just reiterate this social determinants of health.
Good, great message.
And how to address them.
Yeah, great message. Sabeen.
I would say staff burnout and well-being.
Always something to keep top of mind. Cathy?
I would say pay attention to both the economic trends, the S&P and the GDP and all those kinds of things, the way the legislation's working out, that all influences it. And you'll hear me say it all the time, donor retention, pay attention to those donors.
Yes, I've always wanted to write the book, and Cathy and I talked about this. I've raised the most money through just getting to know donors and stewarding donors. It's very important. Danita, any last thoughts on what we should be paying attention to?
So from my perspective, I think that there's real power in the data. And I think that data can help to focus our efforts where they can have the biggest impact, from both the giving, where the money's coming from and where it's going to help. And so that's why I love our partnership with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and Alford Group, because the data can help us make very informed decisions that can have the impact that we all seek in our communities.
True, so true. Thank you, Danita. So we just have a couple of questions that are popping up here. Sabeen, how does one become a member of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance?
I have to shout out my former board chair, Pendo, for being such a great cheerleader. You could just go to our website, flnonprofits.org, and you can see the membership tab and click and see the different options available.
And then I think this is also to you, Sabeen, the nonprofit compensation survey, mentioned that a little bit earlier. Did you send a link to that, or can you send a link to that so that our audience members can see that?
Sure. Our entire research portfolio is also on our website, and just under that tab, research, they can look at the economic impact report, COVID impact report, individual giving, as well as compensation. They're all on the website. And I shared the link earlier as well.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Any other questions from our audience? Well, we must have answered everything. Great job to our panel. I just want to thank you all for your wonderful insights. This was so informative. To me, I learned a few things. I hope everybody did as well. It's just kind of good to have this unified message around giving for the next year to kind of give us some confidence and some inspiration for what we're going to do. Thank you to Sharon and the Alford Group as well. And I'm going to turn the program over to Danita Nias, our President and CEO, so that she can wrap us up.
So thank you, Vicki, for your facilitation of a wonderful discussion. I want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. This was made possible because of the Alford Group and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Without your partnership and your willingness to crunch the data, interpret the data, it's hard for people like me and Pat and Sabeen to work with our nonprofit organizations and our network of impact organizations to address important needs. So this is a service that we think is really valuable, and I want to thank you for helping us to be able to have a conversation that has broad application for our community members. So I think with that, I will close and just say thank you again.
Thank you all. What a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.